Welcome to the debate. So when we think of the Oracle of Delphi, the image is almost immediate, right? It's theatrical. We picture a woman perched on a tripod over some, geological chasm, inhaling sweet-smelling vapors, eyes rolled back, just muttering cryptic gibberish.
And then a group of priests quickly scribbles it down and turns it into some convenient poetry for a king who's just paid a fortune.
Exactly. For centuries, the academic consensus has been, well, pretty clear. This was theater, political manipulation at best, a drug-induced hallucination at worst. But today, we're going to look at a radically different proposition from our source material. We're asking essential and I'll admit a somewhat provocative question. Are ancient prophecies just mystical nonsense and psychological projection? Or can they be understood technically as a form of compressed quantum data that mirrors the mechanics of modern physics?
It is a bold question, certainly, and one that leans very heavily into what I would probably call retroactive sci-fi. We're basically debating whether the ambiguity in these prophecies is a bug, evidence of fraud and our tendency to find meaning in noise, or, as you're proposing, a feature, evidence that these ancient cultures had an intuitive, almost wetware grasp of quantum superposition and information theory.
That is the central tension. I am here to argue that these ancient traditions weren't just guessing, and they certainly weren't just, grifting. They were using a sophisticated wetware algorithm to model uncertainty. They were treating a future not as a fixed destination on some map, but as a probability cloud, functioning in a way that is strikingly similar to how we use quantum computing and data science today.
And I, of course, am here to represent the skepticism that keeps us grounded in reality. I'll be arguing that the perceived accuracy of these systems is best explained by well-documented psychological phenomena, specifically the Barnum effect, and our tendency for pattern matching. And while the quantum comparison is it's a beautiful poetic metaphor, I believe what we're actually looking at is the architecture of human bias, not the fundamental fabric of the universe.
A fair position. Let's get into it. So when we look at the criticism of prophecy, the first thing historians point to is the vagueness. They say it's so broad it could mean anything. You know the type. You will travel to a distant land, or a conflict is coming. The skeptic says this is useless data because it lacks specificity. But I want to reframe that right away. In the world of information theory, what looks like vagueness is often actually information density.
Hold on. Information density. That sounds like a very generous marketing rebrand for just being unclear. Usually, if I send you a message that's dense with information, it's precise, not vague.
Not necessarily. Think about something like Shannon entropy. In information theory, a message that is 100% predictable carries zero new information. If I tell you the sun will rise tomorrow, that has low entropy and low information, because, you already knew it. But a message with high entropy, high uncertainty, carries the potential for a massive amount of information depending on how it's decoded.
Okay, I see the theory, but how does that apply to a priestess mumbling about great empires?
Think of a computer file. When you zip a large file to compress it, you strip out all the redundancies. You remove the predictable parts. You're left with a string of raw code. If you look at that compressed code without the right software to open it, it just looks like garbage. It looks chaotic and vague. The source material uses this exact analogy. Prophecy isn't a video of the future, it is a zip file.
So you're saying the prophecy contains the data, but it is locked?
Precisely. The raw, compressed code looks like noise until it's unzipped by a specific key. And in this framework, the key is the context of a future moment. The prophecy isn't meant to be linear storytelling. It's a seed of information that requires the environment of the future to decompress into a coherent reality. The ancients weren't trying to describe a picture, they were transmitting the code that generates the picture.
That is a very elegant way to describe it. And I do appreciate the technological parallel. It makes the oracle sound more like a senior developer than a mystic. However, I think we have a much simpler explanation for why that unzipping process feels so profound to the user. It isn't because the data is dense, it's because the user is vain.
Vain? That's a little harsh.
Perhaps. but I think it's accurate. This brings us right to the Barnum effect, also known as the Forer effect. The source material cites the classic 1948 study by Bertram Forer, which I think it really dismantles this zip file theory. Forer gave a personality test to his students and then told them he had generated a unique psychological profile for each of them based on their answers. He asked them to rate the accuracy of this profile on a scale of 0 to 5.
And they rated it highly, I assume.
The average rating was 4.26. I mean, that is an incredibly high score for a psychological assessment. But the catch, as you know, is that every single student received the exact same paragraph of text. Forer had just clipped sentences from a newsstand astrology book. He used phrases like, you have a tendency to be critical of yourself, and you have a great deal of unused capacity which you have not turned to your advantage.
Right. Classic Barnum statements. They sound specific, but they apply to just about everyone.
Exactly. But here's the mechanism. We read them as intensely personal. This is what we call subjective validation. The brain abhors a vacuum. So when it's presented with a vague statement, the brain aggressively fills in the gaps with personal details to make it fit. The key that unzips the data isn't time, and it is certainly not quantum mechanics. The key is the user's own projection.
So you're saying the zip file is actually empty, and we're just writing the code ourselves as we open it.
I'm saying the file contains generic noise. You are the one putting the signal in. In psychology, the observer imagines the reality to make sense of the chaos. You're arguing that in physics, the observer defines the reality. I am just saying we shouldn't confuse a cognitive coping mechanism with the fundamental laws of the universe.
And that distinction between imagining reality and defining it is exactly where we need to focus. Because modern physics is starting to blur that line in some pretty uncomfortable ways. You mentioned that the quantum idea is just a metaphor, but let's look at macroscopic superposition.
Okay, we're moving from psychology to hard physics now.
We have to. Historically, superposition was a thought experiment, Schrödinger's cat being alive and dead in a box, right? It was abstract, but recent experiments mentioned in our material, specifically those involving tiny aluminum drums cooled to near absolute zero, have changed the game. Scientists have managed to get these drums, physical, macroscopic objects with billions of atoms, to vibrate and not vibrate simultaneously.
It is a groundbreaking experiment, I'll grant you. It does show that quantum effects can scale up.
It proves that a physical object can exist in multiple states at once until it is measured. Now map that onto a prophecy. When the oracle says, "A great empire will fall," that statement isn't a riddle. It is a linguistic object in a state of high entropy. It contains multiple timelines simultaneously. In one timeline, Persia falls. In another, Lydia falls. The prophecy holds both truths in suspense.
But this is where the category error happens for me. An aluminum drum is a physical object governed by the laws of matter. A sentence spoken by a priestess is semantic information. You can't just apply the laws of particle physics to linguistics.
But why not? If information is the fundamental building block of the universe, what physicist John Wheeler called it from bit, then a packet of information like a prophecy should behave just like a particle. If the universe is fundamentally code, then language is just another form of matter.
Because the collapse of that wave function doesn't happen in the universe, it happens in the brain of the listener. When King Croesus hears a great empire will fall, and he thinks, aha, I will destroy Persia, that is not a quantum collapse. That is cognitive bias. His brain is taking a shortcut. He desires victory, so he filters the ambiguity through his desire. He isn't resolving a superposition. He is just seeing what he wants to see.
But isn't that distinction a little arbitrary? If the observer is required to collapse the state of the drum, why is the observer not also required to collapse the state of the future?
Because the drum exists physically in two states. The future, in the context of the prophecy, usually only exists as a linguistic trick. It's just a verbal hedge. The oracle creates a win-win scenario for herself. If the king wins, she's right. If he loses, she's still right. That isn't quantum mechanics. That's just very clever consulting work.
Let me push back on that by bringing in entanglement. This is the second pillar of the quantum argument. Einstein famously called it spooky action at a distance. Two particles, separated by galaxies, share a single existence. You measure one, and the other instantly responds.
I'm familiar. It challenges the concept of locality.
Right. Now look at the I Ching, the Book of Changes. The source material highlights this as a prime example of an information reality. You toss coins, heads or tails, basically zeros and ones. The theory isn't that the coins are magical. The theory is that the random fall of those coins is entangled with the state of the universe at that exact moment.
So the coin toss is a microcosm of the macrocosm.
Yes, if the universe is fundamentally a web of information, then accessing the correlation becomes possible. You aren't predicting the future in a straight line. You are reading the state of the entire system right now. The ancients believed that because everything is entangled, the pattern of the coins must mirror the pattern of political events, the weather, personal destiny, everything. It's holographic. The whole is contained in the part.
That is a very poetic way of describing what is, I think, effectively magical thinking. You're describing humans as these sophisticated receivers of universal data, but evolutionary biology tells us a different story. We are pattern-matching machines. We evolved to see tigers in the grass because the person who didn't see the tiger, well, they got eaten.
And the person who saw a tiger when it was just a shadow survived.
Exactly. We are wired for type 1 errors, false positives. We are wired to find connections where none exist. This is pareidolia. We look at a cloud and see a face. We look at a coin toss and see a battle strategy. Believing that a coin toss correlates to the outcome of a war isn't evidence of accessing a universal data layer. It is a desperate attempt to find control in chaos. We can't stand the idea that the universe is random, so we invent these entanglements to feel safer.
Between the Oracle's temple and a modern predictive AI.
You mean the black box theory?
Yes. Look at the structure. A modern neural network takes massive inputs, training data, feeds it into a black box of hidden parameters that, frankly, we don't fully understand, and spits out a probabilistic trend. The Oracle does the same. The input is the political intel, the rumors, the wisdom of the priesthood. The black box is the trance state.
And the output is the riddle.
But consider the function of the ritual. The source argues that the ritual, the fasting, the vapors, the chanting, was a way to filter out noise. In data science, you have to clean your data. In the ancient world, the noise was the ego, the fear, the bias of the seer. The trance state was an attempt to bypass the conscious mind to access a cleaner signal. They were trying to create a zero-point field in their own consciousness.
I actually accept the parallel, but I would flip it against you. You know what modern AI models are famous for right now? Hallucinations.
Sure, they sometimes make things up.
They state falsehoods with absolute confidence because they are just predicting the next word in a sequence based on a pattern. They don't know the truth, they know the probability of language. I would argue the Oracle was doing the exact same thing. The trance didn't access a clean signal. It generated a hallucination based on the inputs.
But isn't a probabilistic model exactly what we want? We don't need certainty. We need a forecast of where the momentum is going.
Not if the output is just a cloud looking like a bunny. That's the danger. You feed in anxiety and political tension, and the Oracle spits out a pattern that looks like a prediction. But it's just a reflection of the inputs. It's a projection of the user's desire, not a factual prediction of the future. The AI isn't seeing the future. It's just remixing the past.
I think that's a cynical view of both AI and the Oracle. Even if it is remixing inputs, the synthesis creates new, actionable data. And that leads to the most crucial point, the observer effect and decision-making.
You mean the self-fulfilling prophecy?
It goes deeper than that. Let's go back to King Croesus. This is the most famous story in the source material. He asked if he should attack Persia. The oracle said, "A great empire will fall." He attacked. He lost. His own empire fell. Now, we usually frame this as a tragedy of misinterpretation, but look at the mechanics. Before the prophecy, Croesus was hesitating. The system was in a state of indecision, superposition, if you will.
And the prophecy ended that hesitation.
It catalyzed the future. It forced a decision where there was stagnation. The prophecy didn't just describe the event, it caused it. This illustrates the observer effect in a very real way. The measurement, the act of consulting the oracle, changed the system. The future wasn't set until that interaction occurred.
I agree on the outcome, but I frame it psychologically. The prophecy served as a decision trigger. Humans are notoriously bad at making high-stakes decisions under uncertainty. We freeze, analysis paralysis. We need an external authority to break the deadlock.
So you admit the prophecy served a vital function?
A functional utility, yes, but not a mystical one. It works like a coin flip for an indecisive person. Not because the coin knows the answer, but because once the coin is in the air, you suddenly realize what you actually hope for. The danger, as Croesus found out, lies in using the wrong key to decompress the data. He heard success when the data contained failure. He projected his arrogance onto the screen of the prophecy.
But that supports the information theory model. The data was compressed and ambiguous. He unzipped it with the key of arrogance and got a corrupted file, a war he couldn't win. If he had unzipped it with the key of caution, he might have realized the empire at risk was his own. The information was there. The user interface, his own mind, failed to process it correctly.
Or, the statement was just designed to be right no matter what happened. That isn't quantum data, that's just hedging your bets. If Persia won, the priest could say, "We told you an empire would fall." It is a no-lose scenario for the house. The casino always wins, and in this case, the oracle is the casino.
That is the skeptic's view, and it has merit. But it ignores the profound implication that the ancients viewed the future not as fixed but as probabilistic. They were system builders. They didn't have Python scripts or supercomputers, so they used poetry and ritual to grapple with the unknown.
I will grant you that they were system builders. They built a framework to handle anxiety. They built a container for the unknown so that society wouldn't collapse under the weight of uncertainty.
Exactly. They understood that the future is a cloud of probability. By engaging with the oracle, they were attempting to navigate that probability cloud. They were trying to collapse the wave function in a way that favored them. They were engaging in active reality creation. They knew that until the measurement is made, the drum is both vibrating and stationary.
And my argument is that while the attempt is noble, we must remain humble about our own cognitive machinery. The lesson here isn't that we should start trusting vague horoscopes because of quantum mechanics. The lesson is that we need to be hyper-aware of our own biases.
Go on.
We are constantly reading the world. We read the news, the stock market, the expressions on our partner's face. If we view these things as compressed data, we have to ask ourselves, what key am I using? Am I using the key of fear, the key of hope? Because whatever key we use will determine the reality we perceive. If you walk into a meeting thinking your boss hates you, you will unzip every vague comment as an insult.
That is a beautiful point of convergence. Whether you view it as the Barnum effect, a psychological projection, or a quantum interaction where the observer defines reality, the responsibility comes back to the observer.
Precisely. We must be aware of whether we are reading the probabilities objectively or just projecting our own internal state onto the world. The zip file might be empty until we fill it.
And that brings us to our final reflection. The source material suggests that the future remains in superposition until we act. We are not passive observers watching a movie.
No. By interpreting the signals around us, we are participating in the creation of the future. We are the software that unzips the file.
Every decision, every interpretation collapses a possibility into a reality. The ancients built temples to manage that responsibility. We build algorithms. But the core task remains the same: navigating the unknown.
And hopefully, doing so with a little more self-awareness than King Croesus.
Indeed. Thank you for listening to the debate. Keep questioning your inputs.
And check your keys. Goodbye.